congratulations on making to week 5 on all the time you had to clear out of your schedule to figure out how to get here over and over again on Tuesday nights. Many, many thanks. We have had the privilege and the blessing, actually, as I've looked at this material and just thought, some of you guys who have younger kids and you're younger, it's a real benefit. The guys who are here who are grandparents, who are seated at the grandparent table back there in the back, one of the things that we've done in the seniors ministry over the last couple of years is maybe once a year I have a lunch or something that we connect, and the topic is bridging generational divides. And one of the things that you appreciate that you guys all have parents and you have folks who are relating to your children, and they're just not from your generation, and they're certainly not from your kids' generation. And the distance of thinking and how people approach defining life and setting priorities and what's acceptable and what's normal and what doesn't even cause a reaction anymore. There's such a huge distance between your kids and the grandparents in your families. And so, I appreciate these guys being here a lot just because they're absorbing an awareness that they can transfer not only into their own families, but into the church, that there's unique challenges that you guys are facing in parenting your children. And they're obviously in these cultural categories, but the cultural categories bleed into just the normal stuff that everybody's been having to engage for years and years and years. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in doing this was not to have something that we did to be able to check a box and say, okay, we don't need to do that for another year or two, but to create a conversation among us as a community of people who are guided by the same governing principles. And I say it carefully because guided by governing principle doesn't mean you as a mom and dad are going to do exactly the same thing as this mom and dad do over here. But you are being guided by the same governing principles. There's a dimension to this where you need to know your children. You need to have wisdom that's unique for your setting and things that your children have gone through and their personality and how much to right now address in their lives versus give them some space. Those are parental calls, and you have to be discerning in that. And what you hear at the table sometimes might be very appropriate for that family to put that on right now big time and draw a line in the sand and die on that hill right there. But that might not be what you should be doing in your family. But what you should be hearing is the guiding principles that are leading you to the timing and application of these things are the same. Right? The gospel is an explainer of our existence. It is critical that it informs what we're doing when we get up in the morning on Monday morning. And it certainly is going to inform something as important as our marriages and our families and how we impart things to our children. So we're not all exactly in the same space, and I've just watched this for years as a pastor, as a parent in a church community. It will do us well to create some conversation among ourselves. And so can I maybe just encourage us? And I just wanted to thank Lester and Janine. Lester and I had a conversation last week, and it's just one of the things I appreciate about this brother. He serves us in our men's ministry and guiding and leading us each time we gather with a burden and areas to pray for when we gather for prayer. And so he and I had a conversation, and I just think, I appreciate just that he's a discerning man. He does a great job of pulling us into a conversation as well. I just think he asked some great questions among us. But we're just not all in the same place. And so what can end up happening is, and he just highlighted this in such a great way, you can sit at a table and you can just be in a place that feels like I'm not where everybody else is. I'm just not on the page of some other family member and what they're doing and how they're approaching this. And next thing you know, you can just conclude that your family is so bizarre, or you're so out of touch as a parent, or you're just not walking this out correctly, and you can just go silent. Okay, that's not the community we're trying to create here. We are all a people rescued by the grace of God. We are all people who were doing the wrong thing at full speed against the purposes of God, and we were all professionals at it. And God ran us down in his mercy and insisted that his goodness overtake us. That's who's in this room together. So you should never feel like, hey, I'm not up to somebody else's standard. Hey, this is not about standards. The standard that needed to get met, it got met by Jesus Christ fully on our behalf before the Father. But we are seeking to put on wisdom, and we are in different places. And this needs to be a safe place for you to be able to ask good questions, be out of step with others, and welcome influence into your life. And so hopefully what this course does for us is create healthy community, create healthy conversations, makes it safe for you to ask questions. And just as Gina and I have tried to just share a little bit of our own parenting pilgrimage, we asked lots of questions because we just didn't know what to do, or it got more complicated. We have more kids, and this one's different than that one, and what used to work doesn't work on this one anymore. Can somebody help us? And you're going to be in that place, and this needs to be the place where we're all being led by the same principles, even if we're not having the same outcomes and the same experiences. So we want to create a community, and I just appreciate, Lester, thank you, man, for leading us last week and for helping us to generate that kind of conversation that we need to be having. So anyway, hey, tonight we're going to land at the end here, I think, some great stuff in the videos. It's about relationships, and so I'm not sure how you've thought that through. I just want to pick up on something because I'm gonna dive into the dating aspect of relationships, and Gina and I will try to interact with you. Right now, my wife is hearing for the first time. What are we talking about? That's the kind of week we've had. We decided to have a pipe break in our house, and we've been cleaning up a good bit this week. But we're going to land in the relationship category, and Russell Moore is going to say something towards the end of the video here. He's going to say his wife and him were having conversations about dating with their 3 and 4-year-olds. Now, I'm not sure what that sounded like, and I don't know that we tried that, but I will say this. If you got 7, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds in your household, you might be thinking, hey, talking about dating, not sure that's coming. But we want to interact with that with you in a way that makes you realize there's some things you're going to put in place as you talk to your younger kids that are going to prepare them for whether or not they're ready or even should be talking about dating at some point in their life. Because my opinion would be that's the world has prematurely brought that subject up. It's coming to your kids too fast. You won't let them drive a car, but you'll let them date a human being. Can I just say it'd be safer to let them drive the car? And so thinking some of that through, and from a biblical standpoint, not trying to create rules that the Bible doesn't give us, but preparing your kids for the future of relationships. And so, as you're listening through some things and we have a chance to just throw some questions around together, we want to talk a little bit about learning your children in such a way that you're going to be able to release them into friendships at some level and release them into dating at some level. And what are you looking for in their lives, and how do you interact with some of those things? That when do you know it's a good time for that to take place, and how do you interact with that along the way? So that's kind of where we'll land tonight. But let's take some time, watch the video. We'll have some table discussion right after that, and then we'll just do some open air Q&A stuff beyond that. Well, guys, it feels like every week, it just feels like there is so much we could talk about. These table discussions could go on for hours, and all these topics felt like, I think we've just taken a bite. It just feels like one of those taster things. We just took a bite of that, and let's take a bite of this. There's just so much more we could spend some time talking about, and then we move on to another big subject the next week. So, you're just joining the rest of us if you're feeling like, man, we need to talk a little bit more about that. But again, like I said, I hope what we're doing is creating some conversation and not just saying, okay, well now when this course ends, let's not talk about any of this stuff anymore. Let's let this be a springboard into conversations. Let it be, I know Gina and I have all wanted to just be available to you, different couples, and just, you want to connect at some point and talk through some of these things more intentionally or in more detail, or some situation you're walking through. Unlike what Lester said last week when he debunked the idea that he's gotten the answers. Where did Lester go? Oh, there he is. And acted as though we did. We don't have any more answers either. But we've walked around the block a few times and chased some ideas, trying to serve our own families and our own sense of direction that God has for being a family. But I think finding wisdom is something that God's designed for us to do together. And so please, access us or each other just in a way that lets us talk further about these things. So one of the things that this subject matter put us in touch with, and I'm going to maybe just stick some thoughts and invite some questions or interaction under the heading of relationships. At some point, the normal right development of your children goes beyond you. Right. Well, for us and some of you guys who have a bunch of kids at home, it goes beyond you because they're born into a house, got a bunch of other people in it and their siblings. But it is God's intention. And I think one of them maybe said this in the article there. If it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a church to raise your children. God's design is beyond our families. God's design for relationships goes beyond just us. And so we've got to be preparing them for that. So at some point, those relationships are going to be friendships. So at some point, you're interacting with the friendship elements of your children's lives. And I think, like maybe Russell Moore said, you want to have a game plan for that before that day arrives. You don't just want to be in a posture of, okay, so what do I do when my child is got this really tight connection with this person, and now I'm having to think through for the first time, is that okay? Do we want that relationship? How's this going? And then the same thing's going to happen in the dating realm, that suddenly they're going to get to a point where there's this awareness in them that's going off of opposite sex and how to relate. That's not the moment to start putting some game plan in place. You do want to have these conversations earlier on. So we've got, some of us here have got teenagers in our homes and are right in the middle of some of these interactions. Some of us have younger kids, but this is relevant to your 8-year-old and your 6-year-old because friendships are coming quickly for them. And the dating years are coming quickly as well. So I maybe want to interact with you guys a little bit in that regard and highlight something. Wisdom isn't a rule book. Wisdom is wisdom. You don't draw wisdom with a bold line. It's a little more, it's got shades and variations to it. And it needs to, because you may do something different with this child than you did with that one. But you can't do that with a rule. 55 miles an hour is 55 miles an hour, and it applies to everybody. But you might allow one child to do something that you wouldn't allow another child to do. And what's going to be the basis for you to do that? What would be wisdom? And where would you get that wisdom from? A huge important piece of that is you as a parent recognizing the condition of your child's heart. What's going on in that child? As best you can. None of us know that perfectly. But the heart is the seat of idolatry. The heart is the thing inside of a human being that creates appetites and desires and opens up boundaries and is deceitful and is going to do this even though I'm not supposed to do it. I'm willing to break those rules and I'm willing to be shamed and I'm willing to get in trouble. What's going on inside of them that they're willing to take such risk? Something powerful in their heart. And that is what's informing you about what happens when another human being interacts with that thing in their hearts, either as a friend or as an opposite sex relationship. And you're the one interacting with that, and God has given you a knowledge of your children that has to come into play when you watch them do friendship. and you watch them seek opposite sex relationships and how that's affecting their heart. So this is a wisdom exercise. It's not a rule. Everybody shouldn't be listening to this and say, well, we said our kids aren't dating until they're this years old. It's probably a little bit of wisdom in that, so that you just don't have this really vague concept that, hey, at whatever age, but it may be that even at that age, one child's not ready for that. That would not be a good thing for them. And you're discerning that and interacting with them about that. So kind of want to talk in that area a little bit. I don't know if you had any thoughts you want to throw in and just want to grab a question, or what would you like? All right. What questions would you guys have just in that, thinking through the approaching and managing the dating realm, friendship realm as well? Yeah, Lester.
Friendship realm.
Yeah.
First, one observation that's different about other cultures, and that is kids. I've experienced it where they'll be like, "Hey, yeah, so and so's a friend of mine. These people are friends of mine. How do you know 'em?" Well, we know each other from Instagram or something like that. I'm not talking about young adults. This might be my older son. And us recognizing, like, from time immemorial, it's been your friends, you had life experiences with them. So you had some, those are your friends. We only have two girls, 15 and 18, but both of them in the last year have run into the, for lack of a better term, like the mean girl thing. And I was just hoping, Jenny, you've had three, I mean, maybe that happened at some point ever, I don't know, but, or if anybody in the room has dealt with that, but, and just trying to walk through them with that, because they can't see, it's like their world falling apart, because they're so disappointed
Yeah.
and hurt by folks they thought were friends. And
Well, I will say, yeah, that girls are skilled at being mean, far more than boys
Amen.
are. And I mean, and we raised our daughters in this church, so we've had a child in the youth ministry for nearly 2 decades. I mean, 19 years we've had a child, in youth ministry. And I will say, those can be difficult relationships to navigate. But for the most part, when you're going to church with people, the parents are able to navigate that. But the girls that, or the one girl that went to school, she wasn't super timid, and she, could navigate things, but she was on the wrong side of some very vocal, outspoken. She had some bullying issues over social media, and it was not easy to navigate. And I wish I had more insight and wisdom, except that we did all that we could to really talk things through with her, to help her sort things out, and I mean, there was one particular incident that I think this was even moving towards her college audition processes. So we were out of town. So she was 17 years old. These weren't little tiny mean 13-year-olds. These were, older girls, and and it was, you could just see the blood drain from her face from some very ugly text messages that she had received. And, part of that is sadly just a part of navigating young adulthood, and having to kind of put that in a compartmentalized place in her life that didn't allow that those ugly comments to be all consuming. And it was just the two of us away, and she was able to share it with me and be very open, and I was able to pray with her, and and then there was a time that she actually looked back on that and said, wow, yeah, that was so crushing to me. But it didn't stick for long. But it is a painful thing to go through. But I think the most important thing would to hopefully that you would have an inroad to your daughter's heart, that she would be able to open up to you,
Yeah. I mean, just two quick things come to mind. Not that we had a ton of experience in that category, and I think some folks have had much harder roads to walk. I think trying to be sympathetic in that moment and not belittling or making that too small for them, and this is going to sound contradictory, but on the one hand, I think you're caring for the realities of what's real in their life. Whether they're making a big deal out of something that you're kind of like, oh my gosh, really? You got to make a big deal out of this? I think you do need to discern. Understanding the people that you walk with means what's a big deal to them is a big deal to them. And you almost got to engage that at some level. But at the same time, even from when they're little, I think you want to teach kids, especially in the friendship and in the future guy or girl relationship thing, how big are you going to let that be in your life? I think they do need to learn the sort of the danger to the heart when you let human influence get too big in your life. Teaching them, hey, fallen world realities, people are going to let you down. They're going to hurt you. They're going to be a mixture of good and bad, so that they're not like everybody's terrible all the time. But how big is this going to be in your life? And quite honestly, when you get somebody in the dating world or the friendship world, when they're too immature for a relationship, they can't manage it going sideways. And part of that's on them a little bit. It's not always just the mean person, the mishandling person. It is their capacity to manage that. And so I think that's where we kind of do our kids a favor and create some boundaries for them. If we think, hey, I don't know that you're going to manage that really well. And you'll discern that about the people that they get around, that this person's a user. You'll pick that up long before they will. And so you're aware of the danger that that person brings to your child. But not that that's easy. I know I'm saying that and if you explain that to your child, they'll go, well, thank you, Mom and Dad. I'll just never talk to them again. I'm so glad you saved me from that. I wish it were that easy. But, I think some of that is that maturity thing, that when you've done that with them a few times and your discernment as a parent, they will not like it until they get a little older. And then they will respect you for it, because they will see you were right over and over and over again. And the good thing about that is they start to respect you when they're in their mid-20s and they're trying to figure out who to marry. And it's like they respect the fact that you were very discerning in the past, and that's earned you something to speak into their life later. They don't like you when they're 13, 14, 15, 16, and you're very discerning in that moment. They could care less about your discernment. Anyway, Charlotte. Yeah, yeah.
And then other things start coming into play to know those. That's where you go.
Yeah, that's good. Cody.
Talking to children who are not even emotionally ready for all that. And to have somebody flat out use them as life, be careful that those children are doing all that.
Yep. Yeah, there's probably a limited element. I think as you get older, you start opening up to distant relationships in a way that probably our teenagers don't quite do that. But it's a good illustration, because this is part of that whole friendship picking and dating element, is they're not asking you to pick who they date. They need to be, but they're not. And I can remember, some of the stuff that Paul was ribbing me because, I've been talking about dating since I was a youth pastor, I think. So, matter of fact, somebody brought me this not too long ago. It was my first book. I didn't even know, I can't remember that I wrote it. A Parent's Guide to Dating, but with a big line through it. Not dating, in the 90s. I wrote this 1994 and 5, somewhere up in there. But I remember asking the youth, if you guys were interested in somebody and pursuing them in a relationship, how many guys would talk to your parents about that? And it was like a riot. They all laughed at me. It's like, what? No way. No, I never say that. So in other words, your hormones just came in the mail a year or two ago, maybe a little bit more than that. Your brain is not developed very well, and you're the discerning person to know that's my guy right there. That's him. That's my guy. And I don't need any help with that. I don't need any input on that. All right, well, just remember when you go to steer that thing, that's what you're steering. This thing called dating. You're steering that. And no matter how much you want to put lipstick on that thing, there's just not a lot of equipment in that person to be making those decisions. And so culturally, so the biggest thing, we don't have a lot of time on this, but culturally, the thing about dating these days, and if you know, I studied dating through the ages. What we do now, it's not designed to go anywhere. In our world, dating is not designed to go anywhere. It's recreational. It's just what you do at a certain age. It's exploratory. Can I just tell you, those are horrible words for someone with hormones and young and inexperienced and immature. Exploring, really? You want that person exploring? You want them doing something recreational in that category? Really? It's like, that's what you don't want. So for us and relating to our kids and just staring at this biblically, there are safe ways, biblical ways for you to relate to the opposite sex. And then there are ways that are designed for marriage. Right? So that design for marriage, and some of you guys who've done marriage counseling with me, you know I'm going to pull this illustration out on you at some point. And it's a good thing to bring up with your kids. And I use it as an illustration because I'm an engineer and I use nerdy stuff. But if you're building a house and you build a foundation and you build walls and you build a roof, you're going to build the roof last. When you open the Bible up and you get a description of love in the Bible, you will get 3 words used in the New Testament. You will get the word agape love, this unconditional, foundational, love like God loves type of love. All right. You don't have to be romantic with that. That's in the church. That's the love we're supposed to have for each other. Your children are free to have that love towards the opposite sex, all they'd like. Then there's another type of love in the scriptures called phileo love. We get the word Philadelphia, brotherly, friendship love. All right, that's a love as well. And that doesn't involve sexual elements. It's friendship. It is loving uniquely that person and learning to partner and relate and do things together, etc. But we don't need to get married. We can be friends for the rest of our lives. The third love is the word eros in Scripture, and it's the word, we get the word erotic from it. It's the word for romance. All right, now when your kids start talking about love, they don't take it and develop it into those 3 words. I fell in love. What you mean by that? If you'll teach them those 3 words, that eros love has a very appropriate use for it. It's called marriage. If you want to break out your eros love for someone romantically and kindle affections that are sexual in nature, they involve chemistry and desires of the heart, and we're having to restrain ourselves, and I want to touch you, and I want to be near to you. Hey, you know what? All that stuff is designed by God for marriage. So the one thing that we did hold on to with our own kids was, if you want to have that kind of relationship with somebody of the opposite sex, is marriage in the foreseeable future for you? Because if it's not, you don't need to be dating that person. Now that changed, and that was consistently just what we had told our kids. That doesn't mean that they didn't want to color outside the lines or do some things differently. But if God has given the gift of romantic affections for another person, but it's sort of like they're not designed to come with breaks, and you guys can fill in the rest, okay? Physiologically, you understand how that works, right? So to rev up the physiology that God designed to where you want to now have sex with this person. When you're married, well, go right ahead. Enjoy. It's a gift from God. But to not be married and to pull that into your relationship with another person that you have no intentions of marrying, you're just recreationally dating, you're 16, 17, 18 years old. You're not going anywhere with this, but you've invited something and taken something off the leash that God didn't design it that way. It's like God didn't put a good set of brakes on sexual impulses because they're supposed to be used in marriage, and you don't have to use the brakes. You just need to let the kids go to bed and let's go off. But it's not designed that way for a casual relationship. But you know the other two aspects of love? They are. So your kids can learn to agape love others in a godlike, sacrificial, serving kind of way. They can learn to have godly friendships with the opposite sex. It's got no romance in it. It's about uniquely taking interest in your life, your well-being, and you doing that with me, and us enjoying things together. And we can do that for years until marriage gets a little bit more in sight. And then we can begin to explore, is there romantic affections between us? But you know this, because this is how we grew up, and the world still does it this way. If you got a girl, you got a girlfriend, and I use it the way we did in my generation. If you got a girlfriend, it's because you got romantic interest in her. That's what makes her your girlfriend. So you start with the roof. You don't start with unconditional love. You don't start with friendship. You start with romantic sparks. Man, do we have chemistry? Do teach your children those three things. Do highlight for them there's an appropriateness. Sex is not a dirty word, right? And God created it super pleasurable. So pleasurable that if you try to get around it before you can actually go after it fully, you're going to have a very hard time in this category. Better that you don't awaken that kind of love in you than to awaken it and think, hey, I got this. I'll be able to control it. But when you start teaching them that, well, you teach them that fairly early. And so then when they want to explore relationships, let them explore agape love and phileo love. But if marriage isn't in sight, I mean, I don't know how many times some of our conversations would sound, probably not too many. Hey, where's this going? It really got funny when my kids started to say that back to us about, they'd watch somebody in a dating relationship or something at some age, and they were kind of like, where's this going? And that's the key question. Where is this going? If it can't go to marriage because you're 16, can't go to marriage anytime soon, are you really thinking they're going to manage Eros love? God designed Eros love. It's got heat and intensity to it. If you light the fuse on Eros love, it doesn't behave. It does what Eros love wants to do. Just don't light the fuse on that prematurely and then think you're going to manage that thing for years and years. No, probably not. So.
Well, on a bit of a younger level, when children begin to notice the opposite sex, that's such a normal progression, and it's right, and we would want that. However, like you said, if they weren't of the age, so if we say for girls, maybe 13, because girls become much more aware and, just the idea of a boyfriend or whatever. 13, 14, for girls, they tend to notice. Boys, maybe a little bit later. But the reality is those ages are so young, and I don't know of any of our kids that were so caught up in romance and even wanting to have sex at those ages at all. But the reality is, they can hardly manage their own worlds. And so even at the young ages of just having a girlfriend or a boyfriend, is just a lot for a child to manage. It's just a distraction, and quite honestly, I don't know that they're wired to navigate kind of even if it's just a little obsession of, well, what is that person doing, or what do they think about me? So that's why the saying in our home was, well, where is this going at 14 or 15? So much so that, yeah, when Drew would hear that someone in the youth group, had a girlfriend or a boyfriend, he'd be like, where's that going? They're 15, and it's true. And the other thing that just an observation that I've seen over the years is that sometimes when a family's firstborn child reaches the older age to consider that, maybe still on the younger age, 14, 15, that's still very young. And I mean, it just wasn't something that we always downplayed that until they were much older. And I don't know of any of our kids that had boyfriends and girlfriends until they were, early college. Now, not that they wouldn't have had
years, honey.
Yeah,
They'll come
well,
clean eventually.
I mean, not that they didn't have crushes, but it wasn't an active pursuit of a relationship. We just didn't see that as being fitting. And quite honestly, even when they were little, we always downplayed, the idea of romance or anything that they would see in movies. It just wasn't something that we, thought was so cute and fun. And we have seen that over the years, in a youth group setting where, mom and dad officially have a teenager, and that new season becomes exciting to them, and the idea of their daughter having a boyfriend, or, even kids getting together in their home and wondering what would happen with that. Can I just say that that's just never turned out well? It's like those younger children, those friendships, those agape and phileo friendships always go sideways. And then what ends up happening was when those relationships break, those adult relationships seem to fracture, and it's just a sad thing. So I just want to insert wisdom with younger teens that it's the parents' responsibility really to know your child and to navigate that season with the utmost wisdom, because those years will come to you sooner than you think. And as they are in college, and they're sights now, the guys, they just start realizing who's in the room, and the girls know who's really handsome. That, those are the years,
Yeah.
but not the younger teen years, not even high school. I just think it can be a danger.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all remember the breakup experiences, being in high school, and the breakups and the breakups and the breakups. And, so I mean, probably back to when I was doing youth ministry, if you've built your relationships as a believer in using godly principles, you shouldn't have a long list of breakups, because you don't have to break up agape love, and you don't have to break up friendship love. The only thing you got to break up is, I guess I'm not marrying you. I need to get my hands off of you because you're somebody else's wife. Ooh, that's kind of weird. I just had my hands all over somebody else's wife. I mean, so the whole concept of what do you do with eros love begins to guide how you steer those relationships and what's wise for them. So I think the world does it its own way. And I think we just need to be careful and wise and understanding. I know this is probably bigger than what we don't have time to get into, but I gave you guys a little handout, and I've tried to find, I'd done a couple of teaching things on how do you go about sort of building a life towards a marriage. This would probably be something, I think this was a retreat that we did for the Pivot and the Bridge, probably 10 years ago almost. But it's some principles about how do you help them focus on things? So your kids want to relate to the opposite sex. Okay, well, what can they focus on right now in that category? And part of that is they've got to learn themselves and not just learn this thing called dating. What are you learning about yourself? Because you're bringing yourself to another person. Is that a good idea right now? How are you doing with you and being able to adequately really relate to and care for another person? Because you're teaching them about character, and character matters for themselves as well as the person that they're looking for. But there might be some things in there that if you want to follow up, and maybe your kids are older and you're trying to steer them through those moments, how you can bring some thoughts to help them navigate how are they going to prepare. One day, they're more than likely going to be married. How do they get there? How do they build that relationship towards a meaningful connection? And what do you do when they're at a certain age to be able to learn some of these things? So anyway, these topics are too big for the evenings that we have together. But we're over time. We'll hang around. Glad to connect with you guys, talk any further. Glad to connect with you personally if maybe at some other time you guys want to get together and come in for a visit or have coffee or something. We're glad to do that as well. All right, one more week next week. And next week, really want us to spend some time praying together just about all that God does. The mystery of God in our parenting needs to not just be something we mentioned as a byword, but the greatest of things that are going to get accomplished in our relating to our kids is the mysterious things that God does that goes so far beyond whatever we do. So grateful for that. All right, one more chapter, guys. What?
Can you tell us what the Slingshot Christian wedding is?
All right. Anybody who's got to go, you can go. I'm going to answer that. The Slingshot. Okay, these are just weird titles that I made up from my experience of counseling people through the years, quite honestly. All right, here's the Slingshot Christian marriage, and it doesn't happen as much anymore. This is dated, right? So I would watch people come in, they'd get saved, and so, all right, so they're newly found Christ, and they have this really simple theology. They get saved, they come into the church, and they meet another Christian. Me boy, you girl, we both love God, and so this is going to work. And they kind of immediately develop affections for each other. So they just got saved. 6 months later, they just met each other in church. And then within a couple of months, they're talking about getting married. So the Slingshot effect is the second you start talking about getting married, forget about discernment. It's all about wedding planning now. And so you throw your brain out of the window and you plan the wedding. And so it's like a slingshot. And you set that date and boom! And then you're going to come back in and see me about 6 months after you've been married when reality sets in. And you're kind of like, what did I do? That's the Slingshot. The Slingshot wedding.